Yeah, Paul, thanks for that introduction. So our brief today is just for the next kind of 20 minutes, just to give you a bit of an idea on where we're seeing the economy and where we're seeing kind of financial markets. I think as probably an end investor or a client of Madoris, we're finding a lot of clients are kind of scratching their head these days because when you look around, restaurants are closed, pubs are closed, and if you know a lot of small business owners in Australia, a lot of small businesses effectively kind of shut. And then when you look at night and you see Alan Kohler on the news talking about, the share market's put on an extra 1% and 2%, I think a lot of people are surprised at the moment around how well the financial markets are actually doing and coping with this COVID-19 kind of economic shutdown. Just to start off, I do have some kind of data here, but I could share with you any data, unemployment data, GDP data. I could share any data in the world. And what you're going to see is we're going to see the worst data that we've actually had in kind of 300 years. So I get that Australia's kind of 200 years old. We haven't seen a shutdown like this. And this slide here just shows that the GDP that we're actually seeing today is far worse than we actually experienced through the global financial crisis, which a lot of you will remember 10 years ago. The other thing about this data is it is global. So it's emerging markets, it's developed markets. Every country in the world is not, there's no country kind of spared from the economic kind of data. My favourite kind of chart at the moment is this one in England because they do have 300 years of history. And as you can see, the Bank of England is actually expecting GDP to contract by 14%. So clearly you haven't seen a contraction like that any time in the last 300 years in Australia. Certainly no one in our lifetime has kind of experienced anything like that. Consumer spending, if you've checked your credit cards in the last month, consumer spending really dropped down aggressively as well. And I think a lot of people expected that as the economy's kind of shut, but I guess it was how aggressively any of those data points sold off. And this is discretionary consumer spending, which is restaurant reservations, declined 100% within 2 weeks. We've never seen anything like that. So as I said, it doesn't matter around the data that we're looking at. You are seeing the worst data that we've seen on record. But what we're kind of talking to clients about is to not assume that all recessions are equal. This is a piece from Goldman Sachs, and it talks, and the analysis looked at 3 types of recessions. There are structural recessions that many of you may remember, the US in the 1930s, the Great Depression. There are cyclical depressions. So cyclical depressions are typically when monetary policy is too tight and the economy starts to dive down, and then central banks cut the rates and the economy moves out of recession. And then there's a third type, which is an event-driven recession. And clearly we're seeing a classic example of an event-driven recession at the moment. With an event-driven recession, they tend to be far lower in duration, so they're far lower length. So, and the average time to recover tends to be a lot shorter as well. So we certainly don't think that the economy and COVID-19 will affect the economy over a 7 to 10 year type period. We think this is a very short, this is a very sharp kind of economic downturn. And then when we track, how do we kind of think that the economy will move out of this event? Clearly, China was the first to really lock their economy down. So I guess all eyes are on China at the moment. The Chinese economic data, so the latest data from the National Bureau of Statistics actually showed in April that Chinese industrial production was up 3.9% year on year. So not month on month, year on year. So so basically the factories in China are producing at a higher level today than they were a year ago. There's a lot of skepticism around Chinese data. So this slide just also shows that we track things like kind of air quality. So air quality, if the factories are producing at a high level, you can see it in these other kind of data points. And so we're quite certain that China and the factories of the world and the supply side of businesses is well and truly back online.